Well, good evening and welcome to our Friday night Bible study. This is our second Friday night in October, so it's October 11th of 2024. The big deal this week would have been the storm that hit Florida, the second storm in less than 2 weeks. I mentioned that the storm was arriving 2 weeks ago when we recorded our study, but I hadn't seen what it was doing yet. It was just arriving there. This storm came through Wednesday night, late, and then early Thursday morning. By sunrise, it was just leaving Florida's east coast. So this storm actually came from the Gulf of Mexico, crossed the Florida peninsula, and went back out into the Atlantic. There was concern that this was going to hit land at Category 5, 4, or possibly even Category 5, the strongest category they have for hurricanes. But before it made landfall at Siesta Key, which is just south of Sarasota, that's where the eye came on land. It actually downgraded to a Category 3 storm. Now, that was still bad news for Florida because Hurricane Helene had just come by less than 2 weeks earlier. The land was soaked. A lot of things were already damaged. A lot of places, particularly along that west coast of the Florida Peninsula, had piles of debris stacked up, and the authorities had not been able to get out and get all that debris picked up. So it was still just laying around. Now you're getting a storm that's going to actually, instead of brush the coast, it's going to actually cross, and it's going to have higher winds than did Helene. And so that was a big problem. The winds, even at Category 3, were strong enough that it ripped the fabric roof off the Tropicana Stadium. That's the stadium where the Tampa Bay Rays play. It was built 30 years ago, and it was built with a sort of canvas made out of fiberglass and coated with Teflon, is what I heard. At any rate, most of the panels of that got shredded. Now, the framework that the cloth was attached to withstood the storm, but the cloth itself essentially got ripped to shreds. Another thing that happened, this was also in St. Petersburg. They were building a high-rise condominium complex on Central Avenue, uh, between Central Avenue and I think it's Pinellas Avenue or Pinellas Trail. Pinellas is the name of the county of St. Petersburg, and that part of the that it's kind of a peninsula there across the Tampa Bay from Tampa, and so it's essentially First Avenue South, but it has a different name. So this building was going up between there, and if you go and look at that building on Google Earth Street View, now if you look at it on the aerial view in Google Earth, you'll see an empty lot where they've got equipment cleaning up dirt and stuff because it was taken a while earlier. But since then, they have actually started work on this high-rise building, and they have a crane attached to it. And in Street View, you can actually see that crane. Well, the winds from the storm knocked that crane over, and it fell to the south across that, like I say, I think it's Pinellas Trail, but I'm not sure. I don't remember things as well as I used to. And it hit a building on the other side. The roof of that building was pretty badly damaged. That was the Johnson Pope building. Now, I think there's other things there, but the name on the sign is Johnson Pope. And so then the rest of the crane fell down to the street, blocked off the street. So that's going to be a big mess for them to clean up. Apparently, there were a number of roof cranes set up throughout the area. I mean, they're always building things, right? So that was apparently the only one that came down. But one of the things that struck me about this whole thing is that a lot of the heaviest damage took place on the barrier islands. The barrier islands are islands that are built up offshore of the mainland. They're usually long and narrow and parallel of the coast of the mainland. Well, in our economy, with the way humans think and act, these places become prime real estate because you're right there on the coast. You can build a house across the street from the beach and look out and have an ocean view there. And, then behind that, you can have other houses. Of course, then on the other side of that barrier island, there's more beachside houses. Plus, so this is very high dollar real estate. But the problem with them is that these barrier islands are there for a purpose. They serve to protect the mainland from the worst of what happens in the ocean, or in this case, the Gulf. And so, when you build there, you face. It's got to be expensive to build there, just because in order to have your building insured, I mean, the insurers have to know that these places are highly susceptible to this kind of damage. So your flood insurance rates are probably through the roof. But anyway, and I didn't really say anything about it. We talked last week about some of the things that we saw from Hurricane Helene up in Tennessee and North Carolina. And some of the buildings there were in the plain surrounding the river. Well, that plain surrounding the river is sometimes what we call a floodplain. But again, people like to build there because it's nice flat land. It's easy to prepare the site to put up a building, because you like to have flat land for a building site. And so there's a hospital and these factories, all these things built right there in the floodplain. Well, then when the flood does happen, even if it's only a once in 100 years flood, well, then your building gets damaged. Why do we do these things? Why do we keep building in places that it ultimately doesn't really make sense to build? Well, that has to do with the human animal and human nature, and what is wrong with us after we, as a race, contracted the sin disease. It's one of the ways that we put it, and became self-focused. Well, now everybody wants to have the best for themselves, and the way you do that is to buy it, and because we've got this commerce model that we live with. So now the value of this property goes up because it's easy to work with. And I mean, floodplain land ought to be used for agriculture. Every 10 years you have a flood there, well, you might lose that crop, but depending on when the flood takes place, you might be able to replant and still have a profitable crop off the land.
Yeah, I'd be careful about that, because there is an area that's a floodplain not far from where we live. And they keep cattle on it.
Well,
and guess what happens to the cattle?
They drown?
They drown. They don't get evacuated. I don't know if they still do that, but that was going on in the past.
Mm-hmm.
It was heartbreaking to drive by there and see those cows.
Yeah.
The line in the water. And then they probably took them to the butcher shop.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what they did with them, but...
Well, it just, again, human nature. and so we end up you know putting things where they don't belong because we think of them as desirable, and well, I guess that's just how nutty we are because of sin. There was a story I read just before we got started recording I found kind of interesting. And this may indicate climate change. Some climbers were up on Mount Everest, about 800 feet from the summit, and they were scouring a melting glacier, and they found a boot with a human
Found what?
foot in it.
Found what?
A boot,
Oh,
footwear.
a boot.
Yeah, something you might wear for climbing.
A boot?
Boot.
Oh, boot.
Footwear.
Okay, I was hearing it start with an F.
Oh. Well, anyway, there was a sock there, and there was a name tag sewn onto the sock. A.C. Irving. This is, huh?
AC what?
A.C. Irving, Irvine.
Oh, okay.
He and a friend tried to ascend Mount Everest. He would have been born close to the turn of the century because he was 22 to 24, I forget the exact age, when they tried to climb the mountain and did not come back. And this would have been like 1922 or so. So this was long before Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay became celebrated as the first humans to reach the summit. Well, back in 1999, they found the body of this man's partner, but they never found his body, and now they have found part of it. They also have not been able to find a camera. If they could find a camera and could develop the film in it, they might be able to confirm whether or not these two men actually reached the peak and died trying to get back. So, just an interesting story I happened to see just before we got started recording. So let's go ahead and get started with our program, our study, and let's bow our heads. Our Father in heaven, we thank you so much for your blessings to us. We thank you that you have made it clear to us that you are good and you are love, you are benevolent, and that there is no evidence of violence or hatred in you. And now we want to get a clearer view of your character as we examine the written word. We ask that the Holy Spirit will attend each hearer and that these people might receive exactly what you intend for them to receive and understand through the work of the Spirit. So we ask that in Jesus' name. Amen. So last week, as I recall, we stopped in the middle of a chapter. Maybe we didn't, but I want to go back through some of it anyway. We were in chapter 16 because we were reading the story of the rebellion of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. And as you can see here, I've got up some of the stuff that we read last week, where Moses talks to Korah and tells him, God has given you, he's chosen you from among the community to serve the Lord at the tabernacle. You are already honored. Are you trying to receive even greater honor by demanding the priesthood? And of course, then we read the story about how they were to bring their censers and to put incense in them and to burn incense. And then the thing happened that Moses predicted would happen. Now, one possibility of what's going on here, we, about a year ago, did a sermon presentation on the story of Elijah and the three contingents of the king's soldiers who came to demand that he come see the king. With two of them, Elijah called down fire from heaven and burned the men. The last one came with a more humble attitude and was able to save himself and his men.
He showed him respect.
Yeah, and we pointed out there that the narrative does not say that the Spirit actually spoke to Elijah until we get to that point and the Spirit tells Elijah, go with this man, leading us to believe that it is possible that Elisha's actions of calling down fire from heaven, a power he had been given for that big confrontation on Mount Carmel, was misused by the prophet. God had given him a certain level of control over divine power, and he had misused it. Is it possible that Moses, the peerless leader, the one with whom God spoke face to face, also had control of a level of divine power? And we already know that he made mistakes a number of times as he led the people. Might this have been one of them? The other issue that I'd like to address, and this is something I didn't really have in mind last week as we read this, it just kind of dawned on me thinking about it afterwards. Again, the people who are keen on authoritarianism like this story because here God asserts the authority of Aaron over these other priests and engages in murder in order to establish the authority of Aaron. But that's not what the narrative says. That's just how some people interpret it. And here's an interpretation I think might be more appropriate. How did God design the inheritance of the succession of the priesthood, particularly of the high priest? How was that to take place? It took place by inheritance, passed on from father to son. So Aaron was high priest. Eleazar and Phinehas were his sons. So were the I can't think of the names right now. The two that burned incense with regular fire and died in the most holy place.
And there were two that were so corrupt that they got themselves kicked out of the lineage. Even their father was kicked out of the priesthood.
Well, yeah, we haven't gotten to that story yet. That's the story of Eli with Hophni and Phinehas. But Nadab and Abihu, that's the two I was just thinking of. But at any rate, Eleazar became high priest when Aaron passed away. And we'll get to that story. I think that's mentioned here in the book of Numbers. We might even get to it tonight, but certainly soon. Why do you think it was done by inheritance? You know, that's how royalty was. Where there is royalty still, it's passed on by inheritance from ancestor to descendant.
So where's your castle?
What?
Where's your castle?
Well, we heard a story today about how some people get their British nobility titles, but at any rate, the reason I believe that God did it that way, was to remove the office of the high priest from being something that people would campaign to get. It was not determined by popularity. It was not determined by some leader of the people making a choice. It was determined purely by inheritance. So there was no reason to fight over. There was no reason to covet the position because you could only get it if you were born to it. And, in our day, we see these birthright things as problematic because all too often the birthright inheritor doesn't seem to be qualified for the task that gets handed down to them by birth. We'd rather it was done by merit. The problem with doing it by merit is, how do you decide who has merit? We humans are pretty bad at that. In our country and in a lot of countries around the world now, leadership is determined by election. But that essentially relies on popularity. And in our country, the system relies on people being thirsty enough for power to put themselves into the race and then to endure stress up one side and down the other in order to endure the rigors of the campaign in order to get elected to the job. So the very fact that they are in a position to be on the ballot disqualifies them for the role that they're going to fill. And that's not a political statement on one side or the other. That's just whoever it is that gets onto the ballot is, by the very fact that they had to go through this and were willing to go through this to get on the ballot, means they're really disqualified to lead the country. And yet that's how we do it. You could get into a long argument about which approach is worse. The leadership by inheritance strikes us in our day and age as unfair and likely to promote unqualified people. But then, the system we've got doesn't seem to be a whole lot better. And in this case, I think God wanted to be sure that there was not this putting oneself forward to be in a position that people might consider to be enviable. And so he made it by inheritance. And part then of what's going on in this story of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, these rebelling Levites, was God establishing that he considered this inheritance protocol non-negotiable. So when these men, Korah and his followers, put themselves forward saying, we might ought to be priests as well, not just the descendants of Aaron, then they were setting themselves up against the order that God was establishing, and they were doing the very thing that God had established that order to prevent. And so it became necessary to demonstrate, and let's go on then and read. Well, of course, we read the part already about how Moses told the people to leave the tents of Dathan and Abiram. They did, and then the earth opened up its mouth and swallowed them and all their belongings and their families. And
Question:
yes,
didn't Aaron and Miriam get into trouble for claiming that they were just as much of a prophet as Moses?
yeah, we read that last week. That's when Miriam ended up living outside the camp for 7 days because she had an infectious skin disease. And she had to wait those 7 days.
Trouble for that before these people you're beginning to talk about now?
Yes.
So these people you're talking about now saw that happen to Miriam, and yet they're doing the same thing she did.
In a sense, yes.
Well, that was stupid.
Welcome to the human race.
Well, I've had my share of stupidity, so
Yeah.
I am qualified to tell that somebody is stupid. I recognize stupid when I see stupid. Sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
But probably only because I've experienced it myself.
right.
Oh, yeah, okay. But that was stupid. I mean, this is like, what is that old saying? Trying this, if at first it doesn't work, try again. Stupidity is when you keep repeating the same problem or the same mistake, expecting it to work.
Yeah. It's one of the definitions of insanity. Doing the same thing repeatedly and expecting a different result.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. Now, we also read down here in verses 36 and on about how the incense burners were taken out and were hammered into the metal that was used to overlay the altar. We assume the altar of burnt offerings because that was instructed to be overlaid in bronze, and that's where the bronze apparently came from. And so that was done. And I think verse 40 here is where we stop. This would warn the Israelites that no unauthorized person, no one who was not the descendant of Aaron, should ever enter the Lord's presence to burn incense. If anyone did, the same thing would happen to him as happened to Korah and his followers. So the Lord's instructions to Moses were carried out. But the very next morning, the whole community of Israel began muttering against Moses and Aaron, saying, "You have killed the Lord's people." Well, I wonder, did they know something that we don't know? They're accusing Moses and Aaron of being responsible for the deaths of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, and the other people who died with them.
Well, they witnessed Moses, and I use the term Moses in quotes, part the Red Sea.
Yeah.
So if he can part the Red Sea, he can open up the ground.
Well, and that's what I was just suggesting, that may be what happened here, that Moses stepped a little bit out of line, and the principle of semi-autonomous divine power, he was given some control by God, and he may have misused it here. So that's why I'm saying maybe these people know something. They're saying, "You have killed the Lord's people." Well, were Korah, Dathan, and Abiram any more the Lord's people than Moses and Aaron and the others? Or these people were doing the complaining? They're all God's people. We are all God's people. Some of us accept that designation and live it out in our lives, and some people don't. But from God's perspective, we're all His people. As the community gathered to protest against Moses and Aaron, they turned toward the tabernacle and saw that the cloud had covered it, and the glorious presence of the Lord appeared. Moses and Aaron came and stood in front of the tabernacle, and the Lord said to Moses, "Get away from all these people so that I can instantly destroy them." But Moses and Aaron fell face down on the ground. And I think we read this last week and suggested that this was God demonstrating an element of the character of Moses, to know that even when God was proposing to honor him by making him the father of a new people, if he would just get out of the way and let him destroy the Israelites, and Moses refused to do so. And Moses said to Aaron, "Quick, take an incense burner and place burning coals on it from the altar. Lay incense on it and carry it out among the people to purify them and make them right with the Lord." Or that's how this version translates, to make atonement for the people. at one, to reconcile them to God. The Lord's anger is blazing against them. The plague has already begun. Aaron did as Moses told him and ran out among the people. The plague had already begun to strike down the people, but Aaron burned the incense and purified, footnote G, made atonement for the people. He stood between the dead and the living, and the plague stopped. But 14,700 people died in that plague, in addition to those who had died in the affair involving Korah. Then, because the plague had stopped, Aaron returned to Moses at the entrance of the tabernacle. And again, a traditional reading of this suggests that God was angry with the people and he took it out on them by sending this plague. But as we have already discussed in previous elements of this story, such as the story of the death of the firstborn, where does this plague come from? When God removes his protection and withdraws from his people because of their rebellious behavior, is there somebody who would just love to take advantage of that and sneak in where he can get in and destroy people? Because it's his nature. That's what he does. Number 17. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Tell the people of Israel to bring you 12 wooden staffs, one from each leader of Israel's ancestral tribes, and inscribe each leader's name on his staff." So now, let's be clear, the narrative has not said anything about God's involvement other than at some point he was angry, and we know that God's angry with sin. He's angry at what it does to his people. So if they were engaged in this rebellion and succumbing to the effects of sin in their lives, yes, God would be angry at the sin, not the people. What happened, the narrative doesn't say God did it. But now the narrative does say that God's beginning to take action. What action does he take? Well, some of you know this story, but we'll read through it anyway. Inscribe Aaron's name on the staff of the tribe of Levi, for there must be one staff for the leader of each ancestral tribe. Place these staffs in the tabernacle in front of the ark containing the tablets of the covenant, or the, what's that footnote B say? Tent of meeting before the testimony. The testimony, they believe, refers to the terms of the Lord's covenant with Israel as written on stone tablets which were kept in the ark, and also to the covenant itself. Place these staffs in the tabernacle in front of the ark containing the tablets of the covenant where I meet with you. Buds will sprout on the staff belonging to the man I choose. Then I will finally put an end to the people's murmuring and complaining against you. So after all this has been taking place, all this murmuring, complaining, and rebellion has been going on, now God steps in and says, all right, I'm going to have my say. This is going to end. So Moses gave the instructions to the people of Israel, and each of the 12 tribal leaders, including Aaron, brought Moses a staff. Moses placed the staffs in the Lord's presence in the tabernacle of the covenant, or in the sanctuary. When he went into the tabernacle of the covenant the next day, he found that Aaron's staff, representing the tribe of Levi, had sprouted, budded, blossomed, and produced ripe almonds. When Moses brought all the staffs out from the Lord's presence, he showed them to the people. Now, I hadn't mentioned this before, but we do have a sermon presentation ready for tomorrow. And we will, Lord willing, put that up so that it is available starting at 11 Central Time tomorrow. In that, we will talk about a parable of Jesus that involves plants. And we will discuss how A plant doesn't dare separate itself from the root, because if it did, it would die. Now, what we're talking about here is staffs. These are wooden sticks that have been cut off and are no longer attached to their root. And yet, in this particular case, one of those staffs sprouted, budded, blossomed, and produced ripe almonds. It could not do that even if it was alive overnight. But it wasn't alive. So we have evidence, powerful evidence here now, that divine power has been involved, and divine power, the intervention of God, has taken place in order for God to have his say about what he wants happening regarding the priesthood. So when Moses brought all the staffs out from the Lord's presence, he showed them to the people. Each man claimed his own staff. And the Lord said to Moses, place Aaron's staff permanently before the ark of the covenant to serve as a warning to rebels. This should put an end to their complaints against me and prevent any further deaths. What's God's goal? To prevent deaths. And he's done this in order to stop the cycle of violence that's been taking place. So Moses did as the Lord commanded him. Then the people of Israel said to Moses, look, we are doomed, we are dead, we are ruined. Everyone who even comes close to the tabernacle of the Lord dies. Are we all doomed to die? It looks like whoever decided chapter breaks here had gone to school with television writers. What a place to put a chapter break. Everybody's distressed, and they're asking, are we all doomed to die? All right, folks, now you get to wait for the next chapter. Now a word from our sponsors. At any rate, so let's move on. Duties of priests and Levites. By the way, the narrative doesn't tell us any response to that. That's just the fear the people had. And that may be a consequence of Moses' misuse of God's power, if indeed that's how it happened. Because now the people are afraid. And if they're afraid, their rational brains are shut down. They are not able to approach God and worship him mindfully. There's no mind there right now to do that. So that's the problem.
Here's a clue that would lead to lend a little credence to your theory that Moses acted inappropriately. And that's the text that perfect love casts out all fear.
Right.
And here these people are afraid.
If we go close to the temple, we'll die. Well, what's that text in Isaiah? Who can dwell with everlasting fire?
He who has washed his robe in the blood, is it like that?
Well, it doesn't say it that way, but that's the idea, yes. He whose hands are clean, essentially.
Yeah.
Who has given up these selfish human approaches to living. Verses 8 and 9 here talks about support of the priest. They are allotted the portion of the most holy offerings that is not burned on the fire. Grain offerings, sin offerings, guilt offerings will be most holy. It belongs to you and your sons. You must eat it as a most holy offering. All the males may eat of it, and you must treat it as most holy. All the sacred offerings and special offerings presented to me when the Israelites lift them up before the altar also belong to you. Now, I would like to comment on this. I've given to you and your sons and daughters as your permanent share. Any member of your family who is ceremonially clean may eat of these offerings. So, we bring our offerings to God. Does God need them? No. God doesn't need them. He doesn't eat them. He doesn't
There-
finance his kingdom with our, quotes, taxes. The things that we give to God remain here on earth. And in this case, the offerings that the Israelites brought supported the Levites in their priestly duties. They were free to engage in these duties because they didn't have to go out and plant fields and raise animals and these things. Their food came from the people. So we're offering it, quotes, to God, but in fact, it is we ourselves who benefit from these offerings because God doesn't need them. So when people talk about giving something to God, let's not get in that frame of mind that God needs something. He doesn't.
Or don't get into the frame of mind that God's going to harm you if you don't pay tithe,
Yeah.
or bless you if you do pay tithe.
And I don't know if we're, this gets a little arcane, but we might read some of the different references to tithe in the Old Testament just to see what is actually done there and how they are used and how that's different from how modern churches who practice tithing tend to do it.
Modern churches, at least the one I grew up in, tell you that God will bless you if you pay your tithe and curse you if you don't.
Yeah.
Disasters. And the blessings they will hint at being monetary. But nowhere is that supported in the Bible.
Right.
If you go check your Bible, you'll find that the blessing is when you learn to give cheerfully. You are learning to give to others from the goodness of your heart, not because you're doing it with selfish motives.
Right.
And what the church is presenting promotes giving for selfish motives.
Yeah, it's an instrumentalistic approach to your religion. God is someone who can be manipulated. If you give him blessings, he'll be good to you. If you give him gifts, he'll give you blessings. You
And
manipulate God.
Prayers.
So
Pray with his particular formula.
yeah,
Or, point out to God, you promised this, so now you have to do this for me.
yeah, it's a fundamentally transactional approach to God rather than a relational approach to God.
It's an attempt to manipulate God.
Right. It was interesting. I was listening to a court case overnight, and the judge was telling a defendant, "Don't get into an argument with me. You won't win. The man in the black robe always wins." So, yeah, don't try to manipulate God. God will always win. Just believe that he is good and will bless you if you let him. Water of Purification, chapter 19. This is all more ritual stuff. We'll just kind of skip over that. Now we get to a more interesting story. In the first month of the year, and let's see what they say about that. The first month of the ancient Hebrew lunar calendar usually occurs within the months of March and April. The number of years since leaving Egypt is not specified, so we don't know. It's just the first month. It might have been the first month, but it seems unlikely because we already read a lot of history. But then, these books are not necessarily chronological. They're just telling the stories as they get to the issues as they're telling them. So it would be, yeah, I think it'd be a fool's errand to try and say, well, this happened and then this happened and this happened, because we don't really know. In the first month of the year, the whole community of Israel arrived in the wilderness of Zin and camped at Kadesh. While they were there, Miriam died and was buried. Now, we know Miriam was the oldest of the three. It was Miriam and then Aaron and then Moses. So Moses was the youngest. And they will die in that order, oldest to youngest. There was no water for the people to drink at that place, so they rebelled against Moses and Aaron. The people blamed Moses and said, "If only we had died in the Lord's presence with our brothers. Why have you brought the congregation of the Lord's people into this wilderness to die along with all our livestock?" And we don't know how many years this was, but the sequence of the narration suggests they'd already been receiving manna. They'd already received the quail until they were sick of it, literally sick of it. And now they're concerned that God isn't going to take care of them. It's too dry here. We don't have enough water. Why did you make us leave Egypt and bring us here to this terrible place? This land has no grain, no figs, no grapes, no pomegranates, and no water to drink. Well, the grain, figs, grapes, pomegranates, those would be nice. But they had something to eat, so. But
Let's put ourselves in their shoes for a moment.
But if there was no water, that's an issue. Go ahead.
They're slaves. They're on the stage one level of
Moral development.
moral development. They're used to having everything done for them, and they can see it.
Yeah.
There isn't a level of faith involved. And now suddenly they're being expected to show that they have faith. They're learning to express faith. And this is all new to them, and they're scared.
Mm-hmm.
They can't see God. They see there's strange things going on, and they probably attribute it to Moses and his magics.
Yeah. Well, certainly the Egyptians had a lot of mystical beliefs, so it wouldn't be much of a stretch to believe that these people also saw certain things as being mystical rather than real. So they've made this complaint, and now it says Moses and Aaron turned away from the people and went to the entrance of the tabernacle, where they fell face down on the ground. And they seem to be doing a lot of that these days. Then the glorious presence of the Lord appeared to them, and the Lord said to Moses, "You and Aaron must take the staff and assemble the entire community. As the people watch, speak to the rock over there, and it will pour out its water." Now, does that sound a little bit ridiculous? I remember reading a story when I was still preteen. It was a fable, a legend, and it was a story of this. I don't remember, it was a shoemaker or tailor or something like that, and he was having problems with flies, and he'd made himself a fly swatter. And at one point, he had a whole bunch of flies somewhere, and he hit them with a swatter, and he killed, I think it was 5 of them, all at one swat. So he sewed the words 5 in one blow on his shirt and went out in search of adventure. And he took a number of things with him. At some point in his journey, he met a nearsighted giant who accosted him and said, "You have to prove your worth." And the goal, the test that the giant proposed was to squeeze water out of a rock. And the giant, being exceptionally strong, picked up a rock, squeezed with all his might, and after a considerable period of time managed to actually get a single drop of water out of that rock.
That's impressive.
Yeah, and then this guy, knowing that the giant was nearsighted, took one of the items he put in his pack to take with him on his journey, namely a block of cheese, took it out and squeezed it and got quite a bit of water out of it. And this impressed the giant, and the giant let him go. And the reason I relate that story is now God has told Moses the rock will pour out its water. Huh? Rock and water? That's kind of outside our experience. You will provide enough water from the rock to satisfy the whole community and their livestock. So Moses did as he was told. He took the staff from the place where it was kept before the Lord. Now it says the staff. What staff that was, I don't know. That song that we listened to a couple of months ago or more suggested that it was Moses' rod, the one that he held out over the sea to part the waters. However, this staff was taken from the place where it was kept before the Lord. Well, what's the most recent story of a staff being kept before the Lord? Would that not be Aaron's staff? The one that sprouted, budded, blossomed, and produced ripe olives. Almonds. So Moses did as he was told. He took the staff from the place where it was kept before the Lord. Then he and Aaron summoned the people to come and gather at the rock. "Listen, you rebels," he shouted. "Must we bring you water from this rock?" Sounds like he's not happy with the people.
He's very humble, you know.
Yeah. Then Moses raised his hand and struck the rock twice with a staff, and water gushed out. Now, this is the part of the story that we covered in that sermon presentation, where he's already, earlier in the story, struck the rock once with a staff and brought water forth. Now he's saying, must we do it? This is up to us. And then, even though he had been instructed, if you look up there in verse 8, as the people watch, speak to the rock over there and it will pour out its water. He didn't speak to the rock, he struck it twice. So the entire community and their livestock drank their fill. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Because you did not trust me enough to demonstrate my holiness to the people of Israel, because you acted outside of my character, you got petulant with the people, you accused them, and then you didn't do what I had told you to do. Because of this, you will not lead them into the land I am giving them." This place was known as the waters of Meribah, which means arguing, because there the people of Israel argued with the Lord, and there he demonstrated his holiness among them. While Moses was at Kadesh, he sent ambassadors to the king of Edom with this message. Now, let's recall who Edom is. Edom, the nation of Edom, is composed of the descendants of Esau. Edom meaning red, Esau. So these are Israel's brothers. Literal Israel, Jacob, and Esau, or Edom, were brothers. So now these are the brother nation to the Israelites who are coming out. So Moses sends this message This is what your relatives, the people of Israel, say. You know all the hardships we've been through. Our ancestors went down to Egypt. We lived there a long time. And we and our ancestors were brutally mistreated by the Egyptians. But when we cried out to the Lord, he heard us and sent an angel who brought us out of Egypt. Now we are camped at Kadesh, a town on the border of your land. Please let us travel through your land. We will be careful not to go through your fields and vineyards. We won't even drink water from your wells. We will stay on the king's road and never leave it until we have passed through your territory. But the king of Edom said, stay out of my land, or I will meet you with an army. The Israelites answered, we'll stay on the main road. If our livestock drink your water, we will pay for it. Just let us pass through your country. That's all we ask. But the king of Edom replied, stay out. You may not pass through our land. And with that, he mobilized his army and marched out against them with an imposing force. Because Edom refused to allow Israel to pass through their country, Israel was forced to turn around. So in this case, apparently we've got the pillar of cloud and fire guiding them. God has said, no, you're too closely related. We're not going to have a confrontation with them. The whole community of Israel left Kadesh and arrived at Mount Hor. There, on the border of the land of Edom, the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, the time has come for Aaron to join his ancestors in death. He will not enter the land I am giving the people of Israel, because the two of you rebelled against my instructions concerning the water at Meribah. Now take Aaron and his son Eleazar up Mount Hor. There you will remove Aaron's priestly garments and put them on Eleazar his son. Aaron will die there and join his ancestors. So Moses did as the Lord commanded. The three of them went up Mount Hor together as the whole community watched. At the summit, Moses removed the priestly garments from Aaron and put them on Eleazar, Aaron's son. Then Aaron died there on top of the mountain, and Moses and Eleazar went back down. When the people realized that Aaron had died, all Israel mourned for him 30 days. Moving on, next chapter. The Canaanite king of Arad, who lived in the Negev, heard that the Israelites were approaching on the road through Atharim. So he attacked the Israelites and took some of them as prisoners. Then the people of Israel made this vow to the Lord, if you will hand these people over to us, we will completely destroy all their towns. Now that footnote A indicates that the Hebrew here is probably Cherem, or Kerem, CH or H, depending on who's doing the transliterating. And let's just see what they say about it down here in the footnotes. The Hebrew term used here refers to the complete consecration of things or people to the Lord, either by destroying them or by giving them as an offering. And it'll also be in the next verse. Now, this is not God telling them what to do. This is the people going to God and saying, help us out, and if you do, well, we'll be really nasty and totally destroy everything. We're going to give it to you by destroying it. Well, again, we can make the point that you don't give anything. God doesn't benefit from our offerings. And in this case, nobody benefited from it, because if you destroy it, it's not useful to anybody anymore. The Lord heard the Israelites' request and gave them victory over the Canaanites. The Israelites completely destroyed them in their towns, and the place has been called Hormah ever since. Footnote B, Hormah means destruction. Then the people of Israel set out from Mount Hor, taking the road to the Red Sea to go around the land of Edom. But the people grew impatient with the long journey, and they began to speak against God and Moses. In other words, they couldn't go straight through Edom. And so they had to go the long way around. Now they're complaining about it. They began to speak against God and Moses. Why? Have you brought us out of Egypt to die here in the wilderness? They complained. There's nothing to eat here, nothing to drink. And we hate this horrible manna. What's the saying? Familiarity breeds contempt. after 40 years of eating manna? You think maybe they were kind of sick of it? So the Lord sent poisonous snakes among the people, and many were bitten and died. Then the people came to Moses and cried out, "We have sinned by speaking against the Lord and against you. Pray that the Lord will take away the snakes." So Moses prayed for the people. Now, this is something that we covered in that sermon presentation because we were taking a different interpretation of this from the typical one. Then the Lord told him, "Make a replica of a poisonous snake and attach it to a pole." Well, that's highly interpretive, and it's not what the Hebrew says. We looked into that in that sermon presentation. The Hebrew word that's being used there might refer to a celestial being, not a poisonous snake. Now recall that in Genesis, the fallen angel who came and lied about God to the human race and diverted them into a negative path was described as a serpent. And so might it not be surprising that the Hebrew for angelic being and the Hebrew for snake might be a little bit confusing? So Moses made a snake, and this is what we pointed out. The Hebrew for what's happening in verse 8 and the Hebrew for what's done in verse 9, they're different words. It's not the same thing, suggesting to us that Moses didn't do what he was told to do. He was told to make this. Instead, he made that. He made a snake out of bronze and attached it to a pole. Of course, then we read later how back in the days of farther way forward in history, in the days of Hezekiah, how that had become an idol that the people were worshiping. They kept it for some reason. Anyway, Moses made that out of bronze, attached it to a pole. Then anyone who was bitten by a snake could look at the bronze snake and be healed. Now, one point that has been made about this, and this is why perhaps Moses' mistake is such a mistake. Could the human race be healed by paying attention to something or someone raised up on a pole? Could this not be, should this not have been a metaphor for the life, ministry, and death of Christ? Look at this and be healed. But instead of putting an angelic being on the pole, Moses put a snake. An asp, perhaps. I mean, we're in the desert, not far from Egypt, and these are poisonous snakes. Likely was an asp, was it not? At any rate, this is the story, and this is our interpretation. We're not going to say that you can't believe something else. We're just suggesting it as something for you to think about and consider. The Israelites traveled next to Oboth and camped there. Then they went on to Abarim in the wilderness on the eastern border of Moab. From there they traveled to the valley of Zered Brook and set up camp. Then they moved out and camped on the far side of the Arnon River in the wilderness adjacent to the territory of the Amorites. Now remember, the Moabites and the Amorites, these are the descendants of Lot by his daughters. That whole messy, nasty story. That's who these people are. The Arnon is the boundary line between the Moabites and the Amorites. For this reason, the book of the words of the Lord speaks of the town of Waheb in the area of Suphah and the ravines of the Arnon River, the ravines that extend as far as the settlement of Ar on the border of Moab. From there, the Israelites traveled to Beer, which is the well where the Lord said to Moses, "Assemble the people, and I will give them water." And there's a footnote there We know that Beer in Hebrew stands for well. So Beersheba was the well of the agreement, specifically the agreement between Abraham and Abimelech, or the Israelites and the Philistines, which should have been maintained and wasn't. Yeah, Beer means well. That's what I figured that footnote was going to say. Whoops. Okay, I skipped a little too far there. Let's see. Which is the well where the Lord said to Moses, assemble the people and I will give them water. There the Israelites sang this song. Spring up, O well. Yes, sing its praises. Sing of this well which princes dug, which great leaders hollowed out with their scepters and staffs. And that phrase, spring up, O well, has been used in a gospel song that was popular at one time. I remember it being sung by the elementary school girls when I taught elementary school a long time ago. Then the Israelites left the wilderness and proceeded on through Mattanah, Nahaliel, and Bamoth. After that, they went to the valley of Moab, where Pisgah Peak overlooks the wasteland. Then we have another battle. Now we had, was that at the beginning of this chapter? Yeah, they had the battle with the king of Arad, and that was, those people were totally destroyed. That's the promise that the Israelites had made to God, and they carried it out. Then we get here, it says the Israelites sent ambassadors to King Sihon of the Amorites with this message. Now we've already read a message like this about Edom, and the king refused, and they went around. So they're going to say essentially the same thing. Let's travel through your land. We'll be careful not to go through your fields and vineyards. We won't even drink water from your wells. We will stay on the king's road until we've passed through your country. But King Sihon refused to let them cross his territory. Instead, he mobilized his entire army and attacked Israel in the wilderness, engaging them in battle at Jahaz. But the Israelites slaughtered them with their swords and occupied their land from the Arnon River to the Jabbok River. They went only as far as the Ammonite border because the boundary of the Ammonites was fortified. Footnote F, because the terrain of the Ammonite frontier was rugged. The Hebrew reads because the boundary of the Ammonites was strong. All right. So Israel captured all the towns of the Amorites. Now this is not of the Ammonites or the Moabites, this is the Amorites. This is a different tribe. And settled them in them, including the city of Heshbon and its surrounding villages. Heshbon had been the capital of King Sihon of the Amorites. He had defeated a former Moabite king and seized all his land as far as the Arnon River. Therefore the ancient poets wrote this about him. Come to Heshbon and let it be rebuilt. Let the city of Sihon be restored. A fire flamed forth from Heshbon, a blaze from the city of Sihon. It burned the city of Ar in Moab. It destroyed the rulers of the Arnon heights. What sorrow awaits you, O people of Moab? You are finished, O worshippers of Chemosh, which was the god of the Moabites. Chemosh has left his sons as refugees, his daughters as captives of Sihon the Amorite king. We have utterly destroyed them from Heshbon to Dibon. We have completely wiped them out as far as Nophah and Medeba. Footnote for there, or until fire spread to Medeba. The meaning of the Hebrew is uncertain, which is interesting because Jews use Hebrew to this day, and yet even they aren't certain about all the words in the Old Testament. So the people of Israel occupied the territory of the Amorites after Moses sent men to explore the Jazer area. They captured all the towns in the region and drove out the Amorites who lived there. They then turned and marched up the road to Bashan, but King Og of Bashan and all his people attacked them at Edrei. The Lord said to Moses, do not be afraid of him, for I have handed him over to you, along with all the his people and his land. Do the same to him as you did to King Sihon of the Amorites, who ruled in Heshbon. And Israel killed King Og, his sons, and all his subjects. Not a single survivor so remained. Then Israel occupied their land. So these two kings, Sihon, king of the Amorites, and Og, the king of Bashan, both opposed Israel before they even entered the promised land, and the Israelites defeated them, and they took over this land. Now, this is the territory known as the Transjordan territory because it is on the east bank of the Jordan. Now, for years I've had trouble knowing east from west. When I lived in Colorado, I was living in the territory, in the mountainous territory. I actually lived in Gunnison. And so when I lived in Gunnison, Denver was to the east and Grand Junction was to the west. And I kind of memorized that so I could remember which was east and west. Grand Junction to the west, Denver to the east. Well, then, when I moved with my family to Michigan, we moved to a town called Ionia. Well, there, to remember east and west, I was still a Grand to the west, only instead of being Grand Junction, it was Grand Rapids. Grand Rapids was to the west, Lansing was to the east, and I could keep it straight that way. Now, you may be familiar with the term the West Bank. And without really thinking about it for a long time, I imagined that the West Bank was this territory that they're speaking of here, the Transjordan territory. But it's not. The West Bank is the territory west of the Jordan, between there and the Mediterranean and the current nation of Israel. And it is a hotly contested territory. That's what the West Bank is. It's territory west of the Jordan River, not east of it. But at this point in time, the Israelites are taking territory east of the Jordan River. I'm just checking to see how much time we've got. I don't know that we'll be able to finish this story, but let's get it started. And the reason is that what he has to say is interesting. It says, Then the people of Israel traveled to the plains of Moab and camped east of the Jordan River across from Jericho. Balak, son of Zippor, the Moabite king, had seen everything the Israelites did to the Amorites. And when the people of Moab saw how many Israelites they were terrified. The king of Moab said to the elders of Midian, This mob will devour everything in sight, like an ox devours grass in the field. So Balak, king of Moab, sent messengers to call Balaam, son of Beor, who was living in his native land of Pethor, near the Euphrates River. His message said, and let's look those up, there's 2 footnotes there, who was at Pethor in the land of the Amovites. So they're not telling us where Pethor is. And then, of course, Hebrew is just the river. It's an interpretation to say that it was the Euphrates River. And I wanted to look this up and see if this Bible dictionary has anything to say about this. Because, and this is something I probably should have looked up earlier, but I want to look up Pethor in this Bible dictionary and see what it says about it and see if there's any clue about where it is. But apparently it was somewhere near the Euphrates River. Pethor, cleft or opening, a town of Mesopotamia where Balaam resided and situated, quotes, upon the river, the Euphrates. Numbers 22 verse 5, which is where we're just reading. Also Deuteronomy 23:4. It is no doubt the city Pitru, named by Shalmaneser in his inscriptions, and Pedru, named before by Thothmes III. In that case, it was situated both on the Sagur, the modern Sajur, and on the Euphrates, and so at their junction about 60 miles northeast of Aleppo. So that was the territory where Balaam comes from. Now, the description of Balaam is kind of fascinating. Let's go up here and continue the story. Here's the message that Balak sent to Balaam. Look, a vast horde of people has arrived from Egypt. They cover the face of the earth and are threatening me. Well, they weren't, but that was in his imagination they were. Please come and curse these people for me because they are too powerful for me. Then perhaps I will be able to conquer them and drive them from the land. I know that blessings fall on any people you bless, and curses fall on people you curse. Balak's messengers, who were elders of Moab and Midian, set out with money to pay Balaam to place a curse upon Israel. Footnote C, set out with the money of divination in their hand. Okay. Well, yeah, it was traditional to pay a fee to get someone to do these mystical things for you. Now, was Balaam a practicer of mysticism? Well, that's just a question I'm going to throw up now. Let's read and see what we come up with. They set out with money to pay Balaam to place a curse upon Israel. They went to Balaam and delivered Balak's message to him. Stay here overnight, Balaam said. In the morning I will tell you whatever the Lord directs me to say. Now, he's using, in the Hebrew narrative, the Tetragrammaton, or Yahweh. So, he's at least claiming to follow the God of Israel. And he's telling them, I'm going to do what God tells me I can do. I'll check with him overnight, and in the morning I'll tell you what he says. So the officials from Moab stayed there with Balaam. That night God came to Balaam and asked him, who are these men visiting you? Like as if God didn't know. He's asking a question to engage Balaam's rational mind, get him to think. Balaam said to God, Balak, son of Zippor, king of Moab, has sent me this message. And he quotes it. Then perhaps I will be able to stand up to them and drive them from the land. But God told Balaam, do not go with them. You are not to curse these people, for they have been blessed. The next morning, Balaam got up and told Balak's officials, go on home. The Lord will not let me go with you. So the Moabite officials returned to King Balak and reported, Balaam refused to come with us. Now, this brings up the question. First of all, other than that he's the son of Beor, we don't know much about his heritage. What nationality was he? What link did he have to the Creator? It appears he had one. The Creator spoke to him, probably in a dream, unlike with Moses, but he did speak to him and he did have a message for him. So he did have some connection with Yahweh. Anyway, we read on. So the Moabite officials returned to King Balak and reported Balaam refused to come with us. Then Balak tried again. This time he sent a larger number of even more distinguished officials than those he had sent the first time. They went to Balaam and delivered this message to him. This is what Balak, son of Zippor, said. Please don't let anything stop you from coming to help me. I will pay you very well and do whatever you tell me. Just come and curse these people for me. But Balaam responded to Balak's messengers, even if Balak were to give me his palace filled with silver and gold, I would be powerless to do anything against the will of the Lord my God. Now this is fascinating. There are places where people talk about the Lord as being your God or somebody else's God or the God of Israel or something like that. Balaam doesn't say that. He talks about the Lord my God, suggesting, as we have already hinted, he had some level of relationship with the Creator.
But he lied. Right there in what he said, he lied.
Yeah, but did he at the time, did he know he was lying?
I think so.
I mean, we see these court cases where people stand before the judge and they say, I'm not a bad person. And they don't think they're lying because they have deceived themselves.
But he lied when he said he could not act in any way that the Lord did not tell him to act. And I'm speaking of what he ended up doing in the end.
Well, yeah, the question is, did he though?
What?
Did he though? Did he actually do something God didn't let him do? I mean, he went with Balak, but what did he do? Let's keep reading.
He told Balak how to
Well,
get around the curse.
yeah, we'll that's ahead of our story. But
That's what I said a while ago, and you interrupted me. It's getting ahead of the story.
yeah.
God would not have wanted him to tell how to get around the blessing.
Yeah, but at this point in time, do you think Balaam actually had that in mind? Or was that something he came up with later?
Well, ultimately, he was functioning on greed.
Well, yeah, we know that. And that's an aspect of his own character that perhaps at this point he didn't yet realize and recognize. He didn't see that yet. So he's saying, I can't do anything against the will of Yahweh. So he told him to stay another night. Well, he should have just sent him back. Why did he have him stay a night? He already knew what God's answer was. I will see if the Lord has anything else to say to me. That night God came to Balaam and told him, since these men have come for you, get up and go with them, but do only what I tell you to do. And I think this is a case of be careful what you ask God for. You might get it. Balaam already knew that God didn't want him to go with Balak and Balak's men. He went and asked the second time anyway. And when he asked the second time, God says, well, if that's what you're intent on doing, okay, go with them, but I'm going to put limits on it. You can only do certain things. So the next morning, Balaam got up, saddled his donkey, and started off for the Moabite officials. But God was angry that Balaam was going. He wasn't angry with Balaam. He was angry at the sin that's taking place. He was angry that Balaam was going. So he sent the angel of the Lord to stand in the road to block his way. As Balaam and the two servants were riding along, Balaam's donkey saw the angel of the Lord standing in the road with a drawn sword in his hand. That's how the Hebrew narrator tells the story. What the donkey actually saw and what Balaam might eventually see, we don't know. But that's the description we're given.
And how did the writer of the Bible get the story?
Good question. The donkey bolted off the road into a field, but Balaam beat it and turned it back onto the road. Then the angel of the Lord stood at a place where the road narrowed between two vineyard walls. When the donkey saw the angel of the Lord, it tried to squeeze by and crushed Balaam's foot against the wall. So Balaam beat the donkey again. The stress is up, and Balaam is beginning to reveal the true character that he didn't realize he had. So the donkey is bolted off the road. The donkey has tried to squeeze up against the wall and crushed Balaam's foot. It's been beaten twice now. Then the angel of the Lord moved farther down the road and stood in a place too narrow for the donkey to get by at all. This time, when the donkey saw the angel, it lay down under Balaam. In a fit of rage, Balaam beat the animal again with his staff. This is what happens when you succumb to selfishness. When you allow greed to determine your action. Balaam knows about the money that Balak's offered. He told him, even if he offered me his palace full of gold and silver, I can't do this. But then he's going with him anyway. He wants that money. And blinded now by this greed, he's not seeing the angel of the Lord, and he's not realizing how cruel he's being to his ride. An animal that is capable of feeling pain. Then
under his care and protection.
Right. Then the Lord gave the donkey the ability to speak. What have I done to you that deserves your beating me these 3 times? It asked Balaam. One wonders now, is Balaam so blinded by his greed and the emotion of the moment that it doesn't strike him what an odd thing it is that his donkey's talking? Or, having served as an agent of God there in Mesopotamia, is this something that he's not entirely unfamiliar with?
Put yourself in the donkey's shoes. The donkey is probably not used to seeing angels.
Well, no.
And he's probably frightened by the way his owner is acting.
Wow.
He may not be afraid of the angel, but he's afraid of his owner, and he's looking at his owner. He may be inwardly crying. You might even have tears coming from his eyes.
Yeah.
Animals can cry.
Mm-hmm.
And he may be bewildered over the whole situation that he's finding himself in.
Mm-hmm. So, the donkey asked this question, and there may be things going on here that aren't in the narrative, but it seems that Balaam just kind of takes it at face value and answers it. Well, you've made me look like a fool, Balaam shouted. If I had a sword with me, I would kill you. But I'm the same donkey you have ridden all your life, the donkey answered. Have I ever done anything like this before? No, Balaam admitted. Then the Lord opened Balaam's eyes, and he saw the angel of the Lord standing in the roadway with a drawn sword in his hand. Balaam bowed his head and fell face down on the ground before him. Why did you beat your donkey these 3 times? The angel of the Lord demanded. Look, I have come to block your way because you are stubbornly resisting me. 3 times the donkey saw me and shied away. Otherwise, I would certainly have killed you by now and spared the donkey. And the killing here would have been similar to what happened to Nadab and Abihu. In the presence of a holy God, sin cannot survive. Then Balaam confessed to the angel of the Lord, I have sinned. I didn't realize you were standing in the road to block my way. I was blinded by my greed, not paying attention. I will return home if you are against my going.
If you were against my going.
Yeah. Well, he already knew that, but...
Yeah, so why is he questioning it?
Well, here's what the angel of the Lord, possibly Jesus himself... Go ahead.
He's still acting on greed.
Well, yeah, that's obvious. What the angel of the Lord told Balaam, go with these men, but say only what I tell you to say. Now, why is he doing this? Well, if this didn't happen, we wouldn't have this record of God's protection of his people. If he hadn't done this, we wouldn't have a record of the things that Balaam said, which are prophetic. So God allows this to happen, even against his will, to achieve a purpose. And so at this point, having made the point that he doesn't want him going, the angel tells him, all right, you're intent on going, go, but I put limits on you. You can only say what I tell you to say. So Balaam went on with Balak's officials. When King Balak heard that Balaam was on the way, he went out to meet him at a Moabite town on the Arnon River at the farthest border of his land. Didn't I send you an urgent invitation? Why didn't you come right away? Balak asked Balaam. Didn't you believe me when I said I would reward you richly? Yeah, he believed. Balaam replied, look, now I have come, but I have no power to say whatever I want. I will speak only the message that God puts in my mouth. Then Balaam accompanied Balak to Kiriath Huzoth, where the king sacrificed cattle and sheep. He sent portions of the meat to Balaam and the officials who were with him. The next morning, Balak took Balaam up to Bamoth Baal. From there, he could see some of the people of Israel spread out below him. And that is the end of chapter, what chapter are we on? 22. And I think that's a good place for us to stop. It's been right close to our 90 minutes. And again, we do have a sermon presentation prepared. I'll have to proofread it again. And then we will post it, scheduled to show up on the group at 11 o'clock Central Time on Saturday, October the 12th. Now, if any of you are viewing this on YouTube, because I do upload these both to the group on Facebook and to my own YouTube channel, if you view these on YouTube and you would like to see the sermon presentation, I don't upload the sermon presentations on YouTube. You'll need to go to the Facebook group. The name of the Facebook group is In Vain Do They Worship Me. And in that group, that's a public group, anybody can go there and see what's posted, and you can find the sermon presentation there. So, that's the Bible study for tonight, and we invite you to join us next week and also tomorrow. And until then, we say goodbye and God bless.
Oh, wait.
All right, what is it?
You still going?
Yeah.
I just wanted to say, if my friend Claudia is listening, bye.
All right.
Have a good weekend.
Bye-bye.
Bye.